I feel like I could talk hours about the medieval period in terms of their medicine, because they had a great influence, and they brought past treatments and procedures and remedies to their present day, and it still has an importance in our medicine as well. And I will look at that and how we can look at medieval medicine as a way of treating maybe bacterial superbugs that scientists are struggling to deal with today. So just that quick little introduction, but the deep introduction is even though that medieval medicine is centered around the fact of prevention, that was the most main cause, and that's what you see with a lot of the last lesson that we had with prognosis and diagnosis. It was all about looking at your astral chart, or looking at your humours and the non-naturals, and try and find a way of keeping that balance and keeping everything all happy and great. So it was prevention was better than cure, and that's the school of thought that they went with, because it was easier in their eyes to prevent rather than cure. And especially with the plague and leprosy was a big thing at the time, and their prevention was to look out for the signs and symptoms in someone and isolate them from everyone else. And it's this whole idea of isolation, and we're still practicing that today, is a way of preventing illness in anyone else. But medieval remedies can be the foundation, maybe the key to modern medical issues today. And that is what I'll be arguing today, that medieval medicine should not be disregarded, it should be focused on, and maybe it could have a bit of truth that we're looking forward to today. But we'll be able to look at the evidence of that and draw some conclusions on these medical treatments and remedies from manuscripts and literary accounts, because this is where you see medicine at this point is more through documentation rather than archaeology. But you do see evidence of surgical procedure, but it's the same as all the other earlier periods that I've discussed with tree panning and just tools. But again, like I've said, the tools are very delicate and very hard to to actually look at once they've been found again, because they go into tiny little pieces. So the first one that I want to focus on is the idea of religious healing. So religious healing is, like I've said before, it's the spirit before the body, and this was something that was very prominent in medieval medicine. So one such form of medieval religious healing was the king's touch, or the royal touch, which was a power of touch from God. This person was chosen, this king was chosen, and you see that as an importance of bringing in spiritual sickness away, and keep the person in a better connection with God. And this originated from what medievalists have discussed. This originated from the kings of France, and they had this divine gift to cure by touching or stroking the diseased. This special gift was thought to be the evidence of God's high esteem for the monarchies, and they agreed upon using their royal power to heal other people on behalf of God. And you see this in England from 1042 to 1066 with Saint Edward the Confessor. So even though he wasn't royalty, he was using his power to the religious touch, the healing. So this is this idea that it comes to aristocracy, and it also comes to those who are extremely religious. And you see that with Margaret Kemp as well. She is I think she's very prominent in medieval medicine because new investigations of her work has shown how there's a strong relation with medieval medicine, and she goes on these pilgrimages. This is another way of religious healing, is this pilgrimages, these these healing powers of saints and miracles. She was a mystic, so she had these healing powers. It was this magical healing, and she was able to help with a female leper and a few male lepers, but I focused on the female one because it showed her friendship with women, this female friendship at this time, this female connection, where it was this sort of female friendship in a time where females were oppressed for example, going back to the humoral theory of having an excess of things and being something that should be avoided completely because of that. But two historians that discuss this idea of magic, religious healing, is Keith Thomas. He wrote a book called Religion and the Decline of Magic. And then Lynn Thorndike wrote a book called A History of Magic and Experimental Science. And they focus very strongly on this idea of religious healing and how this is brought into a medieval world and how significant it was today. So monasteries as well, when it comes to this, they also had a strong tie with medieval medicine, and they also had a tie with medieval medicine, where they were having through bioarchaeology, archaeologists were able to realize that they had a lot of gardens in which they had herbs growing, such as mandrake, which we will discuss further later on, but they were also people that helped grow these herbs, but also they can help write the manuscripts, and it was showing how religion tied into this medical science of the time very well, and it helped people explain maybe the things that they didn't really understand in great detail like we do today. So, as seen with her autobiography, Margaret Kemp was her book was printed in the 1500s, but she started writing in the 1400s. So it's towards the end of the medieval period, but you get a sense of this medieval medical knowledge and practices, really, especially when it comes to religious healing, where she's sent to a priest before seeing a doctor and healed through prayer and the Holy Communion, that solving that spiritual hunger and that need for salvation. But the book that came to light with Margaret Kemp is in the British Library. It is digitised online, so you can look at it, but sometimes it can be a little bit off-putting looking at medieval manuscripts, especially with some of the handwriting. So you can get the Penguin book translation of it if you are interested. It's called The Book of Margaret Kemp by Margaret Kemp, and it's not Old English as such, or you can have the Old English version, which again is quite daunting to read, but it's a very interesting book when you read it and you look out for the theological aspect, but the medical aspect that comes through to it is what makes it, to me, even more interesting. So using a multispectral image, Laura Callis, who's a university lecturer at Swansea University, and I done my course on this with her last semester, and her passion for it is, you can see that she has a strong interest for Margaret Kemp, and she went to great lengths to deciphering and added recipe on the back, which was it literally blew the minds of academics for years, because no one was able to read it. And Dr. Laura Callis, she used a multispectral image to be able to look at the manuscript, and she said, when she was telling us about it, she had all these copies of the back page, and it was all different lightings and different colors, and she was able to decipher this this recipe in the back, and it turned out to be a recipe to cure flux. So Callis believed that the prescription was likely an attempt to help stop Kemp's repeated illnesses. So she said that, "I don't think the recipe has been written there randomly. The book tells us that at one point she suffered an episode of flux and was given an extreme auction, thinking that she was going to die. So the presence of this recipe at the end seems to be more than a coincidence." So she is able to connect that link with this recipe. Was added later than Margaret Kemp, may I add. And from what you can tell from what she's said, is that someone further on in history, but after Margaret Kemp's time, was reading this book, and you have loads of evidence of there's a lot of psychologists that have come out of their disciplines and have gone into the history discipline and have looked at it from a psychological aspect, and it gets quite controversial when you have medical experts come into the field and discuss this, because they sort of palm this off as a mental illness, or that she's suffering from bulimia, and epilepsy is one of them. And you can see where they're coming from, but at the same time, I think it dismisses the actual theological debate that is given by Kemp, and it dismisses also some of the medical knowledge that she had. But this person obviously had read the book and had added their remedy for what she was suffering with in the book, in the back, and this was something that she was able to find out with, and she put this in her book, which was launched December last year, and she discussed this herbal remedy that was put in the back. It was called drags, which was sweets using items of very expensive materials for the time. When I say materials, ingredients. So this was sugar, aniseed, fennel, nutmeg, cinnamon, and ginger. And while some, like I said, Kemp had suffered from a lot of mental health disorders, such as epilepsy, bipolar, schizophrenia, and even postpartum depression. After her 14th child, this is where this bodily sickness started, and where this 14th child gave her a very traumatic birth, and so people dismiss that. And if you dismiss that, I think you dismiss the whole idea of medieval medicine completely. But this recipe in the back is able to show us how this held significance for someone in the medical field, maybe later on, after she had published the book after her death. But this whole speculation about Margaret Kemp's mental health, I think it takes it to another discussion, and it can be quite interesting, but at the same time, I think it's not fair in terms of the book. I just think it dismisses her arguments completely, and her experiences, and the experiences as a scribe, because part of the book is split into two, and the first one's written by a scribe, and the second one's written by another scribe, but it's a scribe closer to her, and she's more forceful with her dictation of the book. So that's one thing to look out for with that, is also the scribe's perception of what happens to Marjorie as well as hers. So this is Dr. Laura Callis's book, where it's called Margaret Kemp's Spiritual Medicine, Suffering, Transformation, and the Life Course. That's on Amazon. If you are interested, It is a good book. You can get it online if you feel like it's too much to buy, obviously. I'm not sure where to online to get it, but I have accessed it online. It's just very difficult to find out which website it was again. But it just shows, you know, she's able to discuss this relation of medicine in Kemp's book, and I think it gives us more literature to look at when in terms of spiritual medicine and how this comes into play with just the you know, the popular opinion when it comes to medicine. But this book also shows some medical knowledge of either Marjorie or the scribe, where they're discussing their need of their need of spiritual salvation. But another way of looking at it is how she uses a lot of medical knowledge to focus on Christ as well, and especially with what happens after death, with the drying of the body and how it looks, is that whole looking out for signs and symptoms of certain things, especially with the leper. When she's helping the leper, it just shows how signs and symptoms are used in the, you know, by Marjorie to help her gain an understanding of spiritual sickness in terms of the medical world. But she looks at various illnesses, and so does Laura Callis. When she's looking at the book, she does take in a fact of the illnesses that she has, and the mental illnesses and the spiritual ones, and the physical illnesses, which is a reoccurring theme in Kemp's book. But in this volume of this book written by Callis is interdisciplinary. So she's using her skills as someone doing English literature, but also using it as a medievalist. And when it comes to medieval studies, you do have a lot of people from the English literature field come in, because a lot of the work is documentary and literary. So it's important to have them on side, and I think it's important to have them on side in terms of gaining knowledge like this. This was a big thing within the medieval community, and I went to the book launch online, and you know, that was a very interesting talk to watch, but it brought a lot of discussion in terms of the psychological historians aspect on this. But it looks at Christ as well as a physician. He's the physician. He's the one that's curing us. This is what Callis draws upon, and she interprets the book from a different perspective, and I feel like it's fresh. It you know, is interesting, is engaging compared to everything else in the field. And it's just focusing on the interactions of medicine, mysticism, and reproduction as a female project. And Callis explores ontology of the female flesh as well, how that is a use of pain, how that's a use of pain, suffering, sickness, showing that excess of female attributes is a negative thing, and this brought about these illnesses. But you also focus in this book on Marjorie's maternalness and how this works with the community as well, in terms of medicine, how care comes into play with this. And I think another thing to note with Kemp is that she with how she is who she was, being a mother, and still upholding being a mother while being this mystic, just the way she talks about being a mother, or how sometimes she shows herself as being a mother, and she always looks at Christ as being a mother, and this care. I think it has attracted a lot of women in the field who are mothers, and I think it's a very interesting interpretation. And I think a lot of academics who are mothers in this field who look at this type of work, I think the reason why they don't want to dismiss it as mental illnesses, because they relate to some of the things that she says, and I think that is another reason to why we shouldn't dismiss it based on a mental health problem with this mystic. So next thing that I'm going to look at now is the rise of medical universities, which was seen in this period. It was mostly towards the end of the 9th period, but definitely the 10th period, where this is, where this started. And medical students, there wasn't many of them. They were like gold dust. But if they did take this degree, then it would take them 7 years to study, and a full course in the arts. And it was very hard for medical graduates to graduate at the time because of how demanding it was. It was a time of getting themselves qualifications, getting noticed in the period, and it just shows the professionalization that's starting to happen with these ideas, and especially this. The medical university and University of Salerno, this is prominent, and this university comes up quite a few times, especially female medicine, because this is said to be the home place of where female medicine was first discussed in a textbook, and that brings a discussion on who it was as well. But again, they practice prevention rather than cure. But it is notable to show how this professionalization is coming, and how it's becoming more specialized than what it was, and what we thought it was, instead of just being someone who just walks around and and just gives these silly treatments to what we think they are. But there is two features when it comes to this. So once the fall of Roman imperial power brought a catastrophic downturn in economic prosperity, this noticeably was expressed in the life of all of these towns that the Romans were involved in. And even though the doctors were able to still practice the medicine after the Romans had left, it was more important in some towns than others, and there's an evidence of massive decline, where drugs lists and textbooks and rules and law texts repeating rules for physicians, and the cost of slave physicians, and legislating the medical world with the Roman period is gone. And it's almost like they start from square one again, really. But two features stand out in this decline, and you see the start of these DIY do-it-yourself handbooks, which we will discuss more into. But it showed sort of basic theory and ways of diagnosing, sometimes home treatments as well. It was all about that. But a lot of Hippocratic and Galenic texts were available for the translation, and it was made in northern Italy about 550. But this was all poorly presented, and like I've said again, it was the monastic lifestyle that helped bring this professionalization of medicine. It was showing the relation between religion and medicine at the time, and how they wanted to sort of interconnect with each other, and help care for the community, as this was something that they really believed in. And you see a lot of monasteries, especially the University of Salerno. Sorry, I had the hiccup. You see how this was originally made by monks, and this was a monastery, but at first, and this became the greatest celebrity in medieval medicine in the 10th century, right up until the 13th centuries, and some of the few decades of the last Lombard power, but during this fame, it spread more local. It was becoming global at this point, and you see a lot of visits. So you had a rival in Salerno with Constantine Africanus in 1077, which was marked as the beginning of Salerno's classic period. But through the encouragement of Alfano I and Archbishop of Salerno, and translation of Constantine Africanus, Salerno gained the title of the town of Hippocrates. This had gained a new influence now. This was starting to be seen as the epicenter of medical theory and practice as well. But the school was based on this synthesis of the Greek Latin tradition, which was supplemented from the notions of Arab and Jewish cultures. And the approach was based on the practice and culture of prevention rather than cure, which I've also reiterated. But this opened the way as well of empirical observation. This is the start of scientific experiment, how is trial and error. You see things happen. If it doesn't work the way you want it, then you do it a little bit differently and you tweak it each time, and it shows that it shows the start of that as well, which is extremely important to note. So one thing I want to look at as well is this discussion on whether these treatments are effective or not. And I was looking back at my notes on what I had done for an assessment on this, and I realised I was quite harsh on medieval medicine, and obviously my opinion has changed throughout the time of looking into it. But I sat there and I called them all placebos. I said that people's minds are probably more powerful than what they think, and I think there is some truth to that. But I think at the time I didn't really focus on the evidence telling me that, hey, you know, we can see some relevance in this type of medicine today. And the one thing that influenced me with this this discussion is a book called Anglo-Saxon Medicine. And the chapter is called Rational Medicine. I've forgotten the name of the author and it's not on the handout, but I just read it, and it discussed how the herbal medicine in this period did have an importance, but it's not as advanced as it is today, so we should just ignore it. And that's the argument that a lot of us had was, yeah, there's some herbal medicine that seems quite good, and they'd be like, but you should ignore it. And I think that's when it comes into the play where this herbal medicine is a placebo. But I think when you look at it a bigger picture, a lot of people swear by certain herbal treatments, and definitely in you know, the campaign for CBD in Britain, that showed the use of herbal treatments in terms of people with who had fits, etc., and how people want to go back to using home remedies rather than taking big these strong pharmaceutical tablets. So you know, you see us going back to our you know, sometimes stick to what's provided for us. And the reason why I went hard on any medieval medicine was a very silly concept, I think, really, that there was no scientific words or terminology mentioned, and therefore it's rubbish. And I think that was, you know, I think that's the beauty of history, is that you learn and learn and learn from all the information that you get given to you, and you build your own conclusions. And that's definitely what's happened to me through the time. But you know, here, even on my notes, I just got not as effective, wrong, not as effective, basic. It's just very harsh where I went through. And I think now looking at it, you know, that they had some knowledge, whether they knew about bacteria or any other scientific terminology, which they did not, doesn't mean anything. They used their empirical observation to be able to have a successful experiment in treatment, and I think that's important to note as well. But there has been documentation, very little documentation though on surgery, but there has been some archaeological records which are hard to get hold of, which indicate successful, like I said, ripping the hole in the head if someone has a headache, and some other, you see some right horrible documents as well where they talk about how to treat hemorrhoids and using splints for broken limbs, and you see how they're using their logic in a way to be able to help someone once they get to a situation where they've hurt themselves. Even the care of the wound after surgery, sort of sewn up with silk, and this would gradually dissolve. You see that today with some people have stitches that dissolve, and I think that from what they were observing, that was their way of science, and that was the best thing that they could do. And I think they've been able to sort of show to us that they have an importance, and I think that's why a lot of people are sort of looking into herbal medicine now, is because people are starting to see it used for the right thing, and it can work. I know I've forgotten the name of it. I think it's called Bach flower. It's just drops. It tastes horrible, but I just quickly put two on my tongue. It's normally on exam days, and I haven't had an exam for a while now, but I used to have them when I was having an exam, and they just calmed you down a little bit. I don't know whether it was in my head, but for me, that's what I felt like worked. And I think it's no harm even if it was placebo. There's no harm if the mind is strong enough to convince itself that it's fine and it cures itself, then that's fine. And I think we need to be a lot more kinder to medieval medicine in this aspect, especially when you realize that they wrote a lot of textbooks, and these textbooks weren't just written willy-nilly. They had a lot of thought put into them, a lot of theory, and a lot of observation. But this does bring the discussion on whether these remedies were just crazy or worthy, and I think they're definitely worthy of our interest. And this whole argument of whether they work or is it a placebo, we'll never really be well, I think we could be sure, because what I show you now, it definitely works against some superbugs. But when you look at Wales, especially, hang on. Wales, especially this book, Welsh Witches, again, you can get this online, and it's much easier to get online because of how hard it is to get physically. But they talk about how they, especially in this book, they talk about how these women, instead of having witches, it was these women that were going around and they were helping people with their health. They would help them with other things. But there's a lot of court cases here where people are suspected of being a witch, and how that brings other things, but they were able to go around and cure people with these magical herbs. And from what you can see with it, there is a table of witchcraft, and basically in total there was only, for each area in Wales, there was 4 areas in Wales which they look at, and only 42 people were convicted of witchcraft in the area, which showed their tolerance, because they realised that witchcraft to them was someone going around with these herbs and helping cure everyone in the community. And you see that as well with the wise men, who was consulted for all sorts of reasons to cure illnesses, and they also had these herbs with them, but they were also given out pieces of paper with some words written in English and Latin, with occult symbols as well. So it just shows how Wales was more tolerant in terms of spiritual medicine, or maybe medicine that people might focus on now, but before looking at that the medicine that we have in hospitals, etc. You see that in Wales, and especially with a lot of people who look into Wicca, for example, they rely heavily on spells, and they bring to life really this idea of this Welsh witchcraft of using herbs and everything around you to ensure that everything's all okay, and maybe affirmations and chants. But I do want to look at Bald's Leech book. This is an 1,000-year-old book, is also known as the Medicinal Aculum, and is an old English medical text, and it was probably written in the 9th century under the influence of Alfred the Great's educational reforms, which just shows this need for medical knowledge at this point, with very little people graduating from these medical universities. There was a crying out for it and almost an appeal. But this text is in the British Library, so this is the footnote of it. If you were to look for it, it would be in London, British Library, Royal MS 12D, and then Roman numerals XV11. And the manuscripts, it contains all of Leech Book's work, and you can look at it in more detail. But it went from head to foot order in the book. That was how it was done. Instead of done by illnesses, it was from head to foot. So it looked through everything that you could have wrong with you, and these treatments that could come with it. And it looks at the practice of the Anglo-Saxons, who were, you know, how they had their influence in England in this time in terms of medical knowledge. And the aim of this was to record whatever items of medical interest came to the scribe's attention. And he had a remedy that came to his attention that's very prominent today. But one cure was for a headache, and it was to bind a stalk of crosswort to the head with a red handkerchief, and then you had other ones, which was a remedy for aching feet, which was leaves of elder, waybroad, and mugwort to be pounded together, applied to the feet, and then the feet bound. And this would offer a ritualistic cure for pain in the feet as well, by saying bless all the works of the Lord of Lords, to be able to ensure that you're healed fully. And it seems very silly, some of the things on there, but when you have a better look into it, this is when you come out with Freya Harrisons study. This was in 2015. Some sources say that it was from the University of Warwick, but that is incorrect. It's the University of Nottingham, and they discovered this 1,000-year-old treatment for an eye infection, so a stye, when you have the lump in your eye and it hurts a little bit, but it's antibiotic resistant. It's a superbug, and it's something that it's really boggled scientists to this day. And what I read from Freya Harrison, what came to inspire her to look at medieval literature to try and fight this superbug, she discussed how her friend worked in the history field, and how they brought to her attention a few remedies that came to mind. And I don't know if you've heard that, you know, if you have a stye in your eye, someone says rub a bit of brass on it. It kind of comes from this recipe. And she says, well, why don't you look at this and put it to the test to see what happens? And she done the remedy exact to how they would have had it in the medieval period, to ensure that it was the same. And she had found that the MRSA bacteria was killed by 90%, to which is something that we have struggled to prevent or kill for years. So this was in 2015, and this was explosive in the science community, and especially in the history community, but it just sort of reiterates how this medicine was effective and it shouldn't be dismissed, really. But this has brought a lot of doctors into discussion, and I have the medical report here where they looked at it, and even down to little things where they had to leave it for 9 days at a certain temperature. And I think the fact that it was left at a certain amount of days, it had to be that amount of days, otherwise it would be spoiled, it wouldn't work. And at a certain temperature, it showed this whole trial and error with the medieval period, and how they did have some sort of scientific practice when it came to looking at remedies and cures, and this scribe really felt like there was need for this. But I'll read out the translation of it. Make an eye salve against a wen and take amounts of a aluminium, so it was a cropelic, which was an allium species, and garlic, and pound together well, and take equal amounts of wine and oxgall mixed with alums. Put this in a brass vessel and let the mixture stand for 9 nights in the brass vessel. Wring through a cloth and clarify well. Put in a horn and apply it to the eye at night with a feather. The best medicine. And the last 3 words, the best medicine, shows how he had observed this himself, and he's saying, look, you can trust this because I've tried it myself. And you see this with another one. This is a 15th century headache remedy, and it says, for the migraine, take half a dishful of barley, 1 handful of bentoni, and other herbs that are good for the head, and when they are boiled together, take them up and wrap them in a cloth and lay them to the sick head, and it shall be whole. I proved it. So it was almost like they're trying to say, listen, this does work. I've done it. It's the best medicine. I proved it. They're showing that it has been tried and tested, and they're advertising it in a way that appeals to people, but also shows what was important. But Freya Harrison, to try and get this as authentic as it was back in the period, she used the equal amount of garlic and other either onion or leek, finely chopped, crushed together in a mortar for 2 minutes. And then she added 25 millilitres of English wine, which was taken from a historic vineyard near Glastonbury. And then she dissolved bovine salt in distilled water and then kept it chilled for 9 days at 4 degrees. And it just shows this process of getting the most effective medicine out there and curing. And this seems to be very effective, this one, and it has been up for discussion, but it seems to be that after Freya Harrison's discovery has only really been discussed by the historical community, which is a shame, because I feel like even though they didn't know about bacteria, they were able to deal with it, and it was just from observation alone, which is amazing. Next thing I'm going to move on to is, if anyone's into Harry Potter, they'll recognise this plant. I'm going to hold my hand up and say I have not watched Harry Potter, but when I looked into this, I at first, me being blonde, this was a while ago, but it said in there that they screamed, and for some reason, looking at that, it really horrified me. It just rubbed me the wrong way. But now looking at it, and looking into it, it does not scream. It's a myth, but it was taken into Harry Potter, and this whole idea of putting it into Harry Potter now has sort of made it. That's all is discussed about, really, is how Harry Potter this and that, but really it's a real thing, is where the roots of this plant look like a human, and it can be either male or female. And there's a medieval manuscript on the side showing that, but it's the the shape of a root of a mandrake plant is, it resembles a human figure, and like I said, male or female. And they've been associated with many superstitious practices throughout history, and they have been used in magic rituals. So this one here that I have, I don't know whether you can see it really, but I'll show it to you on the end. It is just a drawing of this mandrake, and it has people coming up to him with tools, and it has a dog connected to him with chains, and he's dragging him out, and they're obviously digging him up. And why this has got a significance is it was believed that the plant cried, or it went mad once you touched it. So if you done that, you'd go to hell, or something bad would happen to you. And what they would do is that these people would dig them up with metal trowels, sort of thing, and get the dog to pull it out. And if anything, if anyone's going to be harmed, it would be the dog. And again, in the manuscript that I've put there, the dog's almost chained. And this is how they grab it out, is through that way of chaining the dog to the root and dragging it out that way. And they were little people, but the mandrake is described in many different things, such as the British Library Harley MS 4986, which is from the 12th century, and it just discusses how they use mandrake for remedies for many humans, so headaches, making a salve out of that, and putting it on the head. They was also used for a severe attack of gout. And this manuscript talks about having gout in the right hand and the right foot, and this mandrake was able to be ground to a powder, and it was administered through wine for the next 7 days. But from what I've read with this, it gives like a hallucinogenic effects to it. So people will probably in another land, literally, and if you touched it, like I said, you were seen as the thief. But for some reason, dogs didn't go to hell as much as humans, because sometimes it tricked the mandrake with them being chained, but it also didn't seem like they had more important souls than humans. It was human soul that was the one that was wanted. But this is talked about in the book of Genesis. So the mandrake root was helped Rachel conceived Jacob, and in Greek mythology, Aphrodite was thought to use it as an aphrodisiac. And the powers are not only mythical, but it was also a member of the nightshade plant, and it was, like I said, hallucinogenic, narcotic, and it was very strong. And a wine cup of this would be enough, otherwise this could kill someone, really. And it was very careful how they administered this, how they collected it, and how they took it. But this was, we see a lot of drawings in this, and I don't know whether any of you have heard about the Voynich manuscript, but people say that was written by aliens, but from the looks of it, it seems like a medical text that was written in a language that has not been documented before, maybe as a way of hiding the secrets that they had. It has had a lot of studies in terms of trying to decipher the code, but at the moment people are not being successful with it. And until the code is, I think, discovered, that's when historians can sort of look at it and sort of dissect it and have a look at what each one means and is relevant. But at the moment, people are only looking at the photos, and especially when it comes to people online, the first thing they look at is aliens, because it's an easier explanation sometimes to some people than just going through the whole explanation of what it could be. But this is a plant that has stayed, prominent in medieval medicine, but the whole concept of it screaming out the ground just made me feel a bit uncomfortable. I just don't know why. I think it's because of how they do look like human figures, and just the way they're described to me. That when I was reading about it, some of the ways that it was described, it was just horrible, and I had to sit down and actually type into Google, "Do these plants scream?" And obvious reply was, of course, plants don't scream, but it just horrified me for a moment. And you saw, because of that whole trying to break away from Harry Potter dominating it, a lot of people were saying that it screamed, and that was...
Well, Shakespeare mentioned the mandrake. So it is before Harry Potter.
Yeah. Oh no, that's what I'm saying. But it was Harry Potter now is why people talk about it.
I don't think I don't watch Harry Potter.
No, I don't either.
But I have heard of the mandrake, and it's very, very powerful medicine. Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. But it was this, when I was researching it, it seems like Harry Potter has seemed to I don't know what to say, dominate this whole this discussion of it, and people were drawing conclusions on it based on Harry Potter, and I guess is what Ellen was discussing at the beginning, what people watch sometimes affects how they view things, and they get the wrong idea as misinformation. And obviously with me back in the day, and it doesn't bother me now, but I just remember reading on it and just being horrified as I've read. But my final comments on this, I think they had a very keen interest in medical knowledge in this period, and even though they wanted prevention rather than cure, they were still happy to go out there and do trial and error, find out what was working for them. And even though they didn't have any terminology that we have today, they were able to still tackle things that we're still scratching our heads over today. And I think that can teach us a lot of lessons, and maybe someone should go through it again and try and see if there's any more relevance to some other things. And I just think this whole idea of empirical observation in scientific study is important, because it brings it's the start of a sophisticated scientific experimentation that is done through trial and error, and has helped bring us up to today, where we have such practices put together. And you see how religion at the time was able to work alongside medicine in a harmonious way, and they were very involved with each other, but it wasn't in a destructive way. Having the church involved helped bring the writings of manuscripts, helped bring inspiration to medieval mystics that helped other people with other illnesses. It pushes that boundary of going further than just someone going around and looking at someone and saying, oh, it might be that. It is getting professional at this point, and they're starting to look at cures as well as surgery in a very detailed way. And when you get to the Renaissance, that's when you notice that it doesn't really change other than how they teach people, really. That they have more ideas of doing dissection in big rooms and teaching people, but we will get to that later on. But the medieval period, it gets interesting, and next week we'll be looking at I believe is medieval disability, so how they looked at all different disabilities, whether it was physical or mental, and looking at their treatments and interpretations of that. And again, is that whole idea of care, and that's a very interesting topic that we get to next week. So I hope that you liked today. I'm just going to ask everyone now if they've got any questions. So Anne, do you have anything you'd like to ask?
I just I'm just reading bits and pieces of other books, and they're kind of bringing it all together, you know. That book I said about the Iron Age period, and Caradog, and some priestess, you know, she had to come and do this ritual, and you know, and she had to take wolf Spain or something. They talked about herbs and things there, you know, to change their sort of perception and to help the person who was being sacrificed, you know, to kind of knock them out, really, you know, and that sort of thing. So it's yeah, I mean, I just think it's yeah, there's far more connection than we think, you know. There's far more to it, you know, in that we use in modern day science as well, I think. With the mind, you know.
Yeah, definitely.
So yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Richard, anything you'd like to ask or add?
No, that was all really interesting.
Thank you. Ellen, anything you'd like to add or ask?
No, I'm fine, thank you. That's very good.
Oh, thank you. Ellen, anything from you?
A few things. On today, we still use thousands and thousands of natural plants as remedies for modern medicine, like congestive heart failure. We use digitalis, which is foxglove, and absolutely huge number of natural remedies are the base of modern treatment. So earlier on, you said that they used to do scientific experimentation was done to confirm. So who was doing this? Was this that lady in Nottingham University or other? Or
what I meant by that is when you have these textbooks like Bald's Leech Book, it showed that they were having trial and error, so their own scientific experimentation. So it's
that's the basis of Hahnemann's homeopathy. Is what they did. They just took an individual remedy and gave it in smaller and bigger doses. And when they found what a bigger dose caused, a tiny dose cured.
Yeah.
And that's the complete, because I'm a homeopath as well. So another one was that you said that they firmly believed in prevention is better than cure. Now, most of these healers sort of took the evangelical route. They sort of withdrew from society and went into a religious centre to take on what they were doing. But how did they succeed with their patients in terms of prevention is better than cure? What was the basis of the prevention?
I think when it came to prevention, I think it is what we looked about next week. So looking at the non-naturals, trying to keep the body in tip-top shape, trying to avoid the things that might upset your body and throw it off, so not being too cold and wet all the time. And that was just what they tried to do first. And I think also looking at looking at palmistry as well, that was another way of bringing prevention by sort of foretelling what might happen to a person and maybe trying to find a cure that would sort of deal with that a lot more earlier.
Also phrenology.
Yes.
Okay, all right, thanks.
It's okay. Thank you everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye,
Take care, everyone.
Yes.
Bye.
Thank you then. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Jess.
It's all right. Thank you everyone for coming.
Have a nice rest.
And you. I'll go and have a cuppa now.
Yeah. Right, I'm go. I'm trying to go.
Bye, Anne.
Hi, Jess, I'm still here.
Hi. You okay?
Yeah, no, I'm fine. I've just been doing bits and bobs. So,
No, that's cool.
I just, I don't know. I realised I was a bit high as a kite earlier on, and then I'm just sort of mellowed out, which is So yes, so we'll see you next week then.
Yeah, no, see you next week, Carl. Take care. Speak to you soon. Bye.
And we'll speak to you soon. Well done. Anyway, thanks for watching. Great presentation. Thank you very much. Let's stop the recording and go on out on YouTube. So I think this is still being broadcast on YouTube. Just double checking, and at the end here now. So anyway, whoever's watched, thank you very, very much.